Hi there, this is Carl Irwin with a short discussion about the state of music, orchestral music particularly, and even more specifically film music. This is an article that was written just at the end of last year at this website here, The Beat. And you can certainly find this and go read through it and see what it's discussing. We're going to talk about the basic concept here without getting into the points of the article itself. But the big question is film scores. Are they getting better or worse? I think you could ask the same thing about a lot of orchestral music in general. And certainly there's less and less orchestral music written that is not scholastic, written particularly for scholastic programs or collegiate programs. The amount of commissioning that is done in symphonic music really trends heavily towards media, video games, film music, television, these kinds of supporting roles that music plays in media. So there's the question. Are they getting better or worse? And I think we all know the arguments here. We've been having it for quite some time. And you can see the person pictured right here on the article. You have the great John Williams. And often people will point to him as being sort of the pinnacle of quality film score. The absolute best of the classic Hollywood sound, and this idea that we've gotten far away from that in contemporary film. So I want to have a quick discussion here with you about that and talk about how to attain some of this quality of film, of music writing for film or otherwise. And some of the ways that you can perhaps achieve a better quality of music that is considerably more like that classic style. So first of all, I think we have to address what is the state of the influences on film music today. And it takes us, I think, to another topic related to pop music. So this is an old article from 2012, over 10 years ago. Science proves pop music has actually gotten worse, from Smithsonian Magazine. What they do is they go through a study where they examine the elements of music through a variety of pop music. This is radio type music, music of popular culture, Western culture, and they examine the different aspects of music, the diverse tonality, rhythmic value and vocabulary, loudness, instrumentation. And they're finding in this sort of survey of music over time that everything is condensing down to a more narrow path, that tonalities are getting smaller, fewer, less diverse pitch collections are being used, fewer pitches are being used, and there's less and less of melodic line. Rhythms are getting compacted down to just a small set of syncopations. In general, things are just becoming more and more, very gray sort of sounding. And that is the conclusion there. Of course, I think a lot of that has to do with the influence of hip-hop, rap and hip-hop into the pop music of our time. Even country music incorporates a lot more of rap and hip-hop features, which is very rhythmic-based rather than tonally based. And you have a kind of a condensing down of these musical attributes. I would also say that this is probably playing an impact even in film music as well when you're dealing with films that require some songwriting. I think you can compare, and even in musical theater. I saw the musical theater show Beetlejuice, not recently, was traveling through my area. And I noted that all of the pieces, while it was very entertaining, the pieces did not connect with each other as they have in previous works, such as music that would be written for musicals by Alan Menken, where he would take a pitch collection that was diverse and wide and have some melodies, and he would use that same pitch collection throughout so that the music would tie together. Instead, what you get was, in more contemporary musical theater, I think, is kind of separate pop tunes that don't really relate in terms of musical attributes. You can kind of see this a little bit more in even some of these Alan Menken shows that have been made into live action movies like Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, whatever, these things, Disney properties that have been brought back out and kind of remade. And they add new music, and usually they add music sometimes written by pop writers. And you can hear that music really has no relationship to the music surrounding it. It's very obvious, very glaring. Not that it's bad or better or whatever, but it is not related. And I think that does something to the unified identity of a work. Likewise, though, even though you have these pieces that don't have as much relationship to one another, they're still condensed down because they're based very much on contemporary pop music conventions, which are hip-hop and rap oriented. And you have less diversity in pitch collections, less tonality, less movement of the musical line, less shape. It becomes shapeless. And this, of course, will influence film music as well, particularly when you have music written for film where there might be some songwriting involved in it, and that songwriting then influences the underscore. So it's something worth mentioning. It's the adage that was very well portrayed in the Trolls World Tour film with this little meme by the character Barb, right? And Barb turns and says, "Once again, pop has ruined everything," right? And it gets a laugh because we kind of all know about this influence and what it has done to other types of music. It just is what people like. And we can't say that it's necessarily unwarranted because the music does sell. I think it sells well because it's easy to grasp. It's easy listening. People can learn it quick. They can sing along with it in their cars as they're driving along. It kind of appeals to accessibility in a way. And that might be part of the reason why it has become as popular as pop music as it has. But now let's look at some film music. So we'll go back to this other question here, again, pertaining to John Williams in particular and people like him, Jerry Goldsmith, even older Alan Silvestri work from back in the 80s and 90s. And we can discuss here why things are different now. So really what I think you're dealing with is two different camps of film score writing, but they don't exist merely on their own. I think they exist because of the influences that cause them to exist. You have sort of the classic Hollywood sound, right, exemplified by Williams, but then you also have the contemporary sound, I think, exemplified by Hans Zimmer, right? I think you would say Hans Zimmer is really the golden boy of the contemporary film music sound, so much so that many contemporary film composers come out of Hans Zimmer's influence. They worked for him, they did orchestration for him, they did ghostwriting with him, and they come out of his studio and are associates of him, and you hear that. But I don't think that's the reason why we have two camps. It's not merely that you have kind of two philosophies on music. I think it has to do with the film itself. And I think it also has to do with what influences film score composers and composers in general. So first of all, let's look at film. When you compare film music of today with the film music of 30 plus years ago, in terms of kind of the popular film scene, the more contemporary, or rather the more common film-going film, right? The big blockbuster movie that's playing that everybody is going to see. When you compare the films, you should note that they're quite different from one another. Take superhero movies, for example. If you look at kind of the DC comic Superman type movie of today, and then, of course, the Marvel Studios movies that are out there, and then you compare them to the superhero movies of yesteryear, for example, the Superman series, which John Williams wrote the music for. If you compare the films themselves, you can see a very clear contrast. In the older variation, you had something that really kind of jumped off of the page. It was an absurd kind of depiction, very campy, as you would say, exaggeration of a cartoon placed into real life. It is the taking of real people and making them cartoon-like. You have very character-driven films. It's not just true of those kinds of films, but it's also true of even the other popular films of that time. You look at Indiana Jones, right? Some of these Steven Spielberg, George Lucas properties, Star Wars. You look at even Jaws. To some extent, E.T. Some of these films, they're very, very cartoon-like. They're character-driven. They're very playful in the way that characters are portrayed. There's a lot of ingrained comedy, a certain amount of slapstick to it. There's a kind of homely sensibility to them that appealed to a wider group. And even though these movies had serious moments, I don't think you could say that E.T., for example, doesn't have serious moments with a lot of gravity. They are very playful. They're very, very playful. They're over the top in characterization, and they're character driven. The characters are uniquely different, and there's a kind of a, I don't know, I don't want to keep saying absurdity to them, but there is an amount of levity, I think, to those kinds of films. When you look at films today, you compare it to the current superhero type movies and other movies that kind of are in comparison, even like the Jurassic Park movies, right, which are very much kind of in line with that type of blockbuster film from years gone by. They're extremely serious. They're very serious. There's certainly diverse characters in a superhero movie, but they're put into a very gritty kind of atmosphere. There is a lot of gravity, a lot of weight, very serious themes. It's edgy, right? It's emotional more than it is playful. And I think when you have that kind of visual property, it's going to dictate a certain kind of music that is not playful. It is not character-driven. It doesn't portray a diversity of characters, but rather it adds to the atmosphere that is intended by the picture. And I think that is really where you get the separation. It's not that Hans Zimmer and the like are not composing as well as John Williams and his associates from an era gone by. It's that you couldn't really put John Williams' music into these films today. So the question is will we ever get that music back? Well, I don't think it ever really went away. I think we're just looking in the wrong place. So I would suggest that you look for properties that exhibit the qualities of those films from 30, 40 years ago. And the place that you find it is in animation. If you look at Pixar, Disney animation, Pixar, and specifically in DreamWorks animation, you'll see these kinds of playful, campy properties that are very character-driven, have a lot of levity, a lot of humor in them. And if you look at the composers writing for them, you have Michael Giacchino writing for a lot for Pixar, and then you have John Powell writing quite a bit of material for DreamWorks. And you look at How to Train Your Dragon, for example, and Up, and Coco, and some of these properties that have that are also song driven too. There's songwriting that are involved in them, and those songs certainly influence the underscore that comes out of it. When you look at these properties, I think you see that old school Hollywood style truly alive and well. Very thematically driven, singable tunes that just stick in your ear. And as you walk away from it, you just can't help but think of these character-driven themes that are certainly warranted in that property. So now, how do you write like this? How do you write like this? I think another thing that has influenced writing today, not just in film music, but also in writing in general, is that people are copying people who have copied people who have copied other people. Where you have Hans Zimmer has outlined a certain kind of music for a certain kind of film and visual media, you have people that have emulated that, right? They're writing like him. Whereas you have John Williams, who certainly copied some things too, I think, and we'll get to that in a minute. You have people emulating Williams, right? And people emulating the people that emulate Williams. And then what you end up with is kind of like having a carbon copy that's copied and copied and copied and copied, and it starts to lose its integrity. And the vocabulary starts to narrow down. If you want to write like John Williams, don't listen to John Williams. Here's my advice, and here's the end of the video and my recommendation. Do what John Williams did. Instead, you need to look at classical and romantic composition, and you need to listen to the people that influenced Williams. You want to be listening to Strauss, you want to be listening to Wagner, you want to be listening to Beethoven, Mozart, you want to be listening to these classical and romantic composers and their highly thematic material, and you want to borrow and steal as much of that vocabulary as you can and then insert it into your writing. And in doing so, you will sound very much like that classic Hollywood sound in all of your writing. We'll talk about more on that in coming videos, but I leave you with that recommendation. Good luck with that. Happy mixing.